Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Anita Bielicka. I am from Orpheus Cyber. And today I'm going to talk about the importance of diversity in analytical teams, specifically in cyber threat intelligence. But I hope that people who are maybe not entirely focused on cyber threat intelligence can maybe take away something from this presentation as well. So what's on the agenda? First of all, I'm going to talk about what is diversity in general. Then does the UK cybersecurity industry lack diversity? Why would diversity be important for the cybersecurity sector? What are the current obstacles to diversifying it if there are steps necessary? And how can we increase diversity? And then I'll have a very small printed list of references in case you care. And obviously there's time for questions as well. So speaking about diversity, so diversity is a very broad term. It basically just means a multitude of a variety of things that can be, I don't know, variety of colors, of flowers, of types of yogurt on a supermarket shelf, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about a diversity of people. So most of the time when people think about a diversity of people, we think about gender diversity. So for example, women's representation in typically male-dominated sectors. Diversity of ethnicity, for example, trying to increase the representation of underrepresented groups. But we also have kind of spinning off of diversity of ethnicity, diversity of culture. So people who were raised in the same country, so technically they're perhaps ethnically the same, may still grow up in a very different culture in one and the same country. Then we have the diversity of educational background. I mean, educational background is almost self-explanatory, I would say. You have high school degrees, vocational degrees, PhDs, masters, bachelors, and all the sub-flavors thereof. Then we also have a diversity of political ideology, and I think that is one of the more underestimated forms of diversity. So the diversity of thought that you can't necessarily see, but that can very much influence how we perceive the world or how analytical teams may come to conclusions. And lastly, diversity of cognition. So for example, there may be people who are on the autistic spectrum or have ADHD and who may face obstacles in trying to break into the cybersecurity sector as well. So having all of this in mind, we can pose the question, does the UK cybersecurity industry lack diversity? Sadly, there is not a single comprehensive study that actually addresses this with the UK in particular. There are some vague percentage statements as to women's representation. I think the female representation in the UK cybersecurity sector is roughly 7%, something around that. Apparently it is a lot higher in North America. In North America it's apparently 14%. But in terms of other forms of diversity, it is very difficult to also ascertain how much diversity of politics or educational background you have, because that is somewhat more difficult to quantify. However, while researching, I came across a quote by a scholar of intelligence analysis, and he said, he was speaking about the US intelligence community, but I thought that quote was quite interesting in terms of what it stated about analytical teams more broadly. He said, consider a typical intelligence analyst, 30-something years old, single or recently married with no children, as likely to be female or male, living in the eastern urban environment of Greater Washington, recent product of a university social sciences department without military service experience, secularly minded, and who reads the Washington Post every morning. So while reading this quote, I thought, well, you can exchange Washington Post for, I guess, Financial Times or The Economist, and Eastern Urban Environment of Greater Washington for London, and you switch intelligence analyst for cyber threat intelligence analyst, and the quotes cover each other fairly well. And looking at the ISC squared 2019 cybersecurity workforce statistic, I'm not sure if you can see all the numbers. It turns out, well, yes, a high percentage of cybersecurity professionals are between the age of 25 and 44, so the vast majority of them actually. And the majority of them also have a bachelor's or master's degree. So there does seem to be a much stronger representation of a certain demographic in the cybersecurity workforce globally. Since sadly there is no separate study on the UK, I have to extrapolate from the global studies. But I'm going to come to why a diversity, for instance, in education and age may be worthwhile. So why is diversity important for analytical teams? I will make 3 points about this. Number one is alleviating cognitive biases. So a cognitive bias is basically kind of a mental shortcut that we take to get to a conclusion that we perceive as very convenient or as very rational. However, that the outcome of that cognitive bias may perhaps be accurate, but it is quite likely to be skewed. So depending on how we see the world, we apply certain cognitive biases and skew our analysis towards that. And the term cognitive bias has been first termed by Tversky and Kahneman in 1972. I'm sure many of you have heard of the book Thinking Fast and Slow. They have very extensively written about cognitive biases and how severely they impact our decision making. So why do I bring diversity into this? Well, some of the remedies that they named in their studies, together with Philip Tetlock, who wrote the book Super Forecasting, I believe it's called, that in order to alleviate these kind of cognitive biases, we can either encourage diversity of thought within one given analytical team, so basically encouraging disagreement within a team, or which can be helped by diversity. Or we can specifically train people to undo their cognitive biases, but it turns out that while we can be very aware of cognitive biases, we still have them, and even extremely educated and self-aware people can still have cognitive biases, and oftentimes do. So obviously diversity is perhaps not the all-in-one solution to this, but my argument is that it can definitely help. Some examples of cognitive biases in intelligence analysis, and I would say cyber threat intelligence as well, are mirror imaging, which means that we assume other actors from different backgrounds to have the same motivations and same rationale as we do. So for example, in cyber threat intelligence, when we analyze nation-state threat actors, we will generally view their motivations through our own lens, whereas, for example, a North Korean hacking group may have motivations for conducting operations that are very different to what we would perceive as rational, as proper motivation for operations. Then we have post hoc ergo propter hoc, which basically means after this, therefore, because of this. So an example of this would be the defacement of the website of the Federal Depository Library Program in the wake of the Qasem Soleimani killing, which, as far as I remember, had a vague pro-Iranian message on it. There was a picture, kind of a kitschy picture of Qasem Soleimani and an Iranian phrase under it. While we may be prompted to believe that this was a causal relation, or that this must have been specifically a pro-Iranian message because of the Soleimani killing, it may well be that someone just wanted to make a joke. These could have been script kiddies as well. However, we are primed because we are primed to believe that there is a very necessary causal relationship, and that there's sorry, I forgot where I'm going with this. Anyway, coming to the next point, confirmation bias. So I guess many people are familiar with this one. Confirmation bias is basically when we feel that we know the answer just out of instinct, and then we are specifically looking for supporting evidence. An example of this would be, for instance, if you conduct infrastructure analysis, you may come across infrastructure in a campaign that has been previously used by a known threat actor, and perhaps the campaign has the campaign's objectives or the campaign's conduct is in line with a nation state that we often attribute these kinds of campaigns to. So not looking at anyone particular, but you can see the image on the right. While it may well be that we turn out to be right, our confirmation bias in seeking to find the explanation already without perhaps having all the evidence can lead us down a very wrong path. So it's always important to keep in mind that even though it may feel right, what we are already observing, we should still take a step back and perhaps think again whether we're not just desperately trying to find a pattern where there is none. Then we have the overconfidence effect, which is, I guess, very heavy reliance on one's own expertise. So I guess this would probably affect people who are very experienced already. So if you have 20 years of work experience in cybersecurity or cyber threat intelligence, you may become so reliant on your expertise that you're not necessarily willing to listen to dissenting opinions, especially from people who do not have as much experience as you do. So having all these biases in mind, perhaps if we increase diversity in analytical teams, not just of people, but also diversity of thought, so encouraging devil's advocate positions, we could perhaps alleviate some of these. Then next point, the importance of diversity, alleviating the workforce gap. Googling cybersecurity skills shortage and UK and whatnot throws up so many headlines with so many odd statistics. I'm not going to try and bore you with all the specific percentages that came up. However, there's general agreement that there is a skilled shortage in comparison to the demand for skills in cybersecurity more broadly. And what I will come to later is that may well have to do with the hiring process as well, and with how cybersecurity is being framed as a discipline. So obviously, if we increase diversity and perhaps reach out to more people that previously have not felt comfortable with seeking cybersecurity jobs, we can try to alleviate this workforce gap as well. Then importance of diversity, lastly, language capabilities. Yes, I threw up a very passive-aggressive language capability statistic, which lists the UK as the very last in terms of foreign language capabilities across the EU. I get that we have gotten Brexit done. However, bear in mind, it's still a good comparison compared to other European countries. And I guess especially now that the UK is leaving and will be changing its labor laws, hiring people perhaps from the European Union will become more difficult. And especially because in the UK, foreigners, considering the current language capabilities gap, are especially important to, conduct research in different languages and basically improve the language capabilities of the entire team. I think diversity is a very good argument in order to alleviate this issue as well. Coming to obstacles to diversification. Now, I guess that I've listed a couple of reasons why diversity may well be very helpful for the cybersecurity sector. I'm coming to what may be kind of hindering our efforts in increasing diversity at the moment. Number one, hiring criteria. So I myself am not from a programming or computer science or coding background, and before I took a cybersecurity course at King's College, I was 100% sure I will never work in cybersecurity because I have no clue what that is, and I will basically never be able to catch up on technical terms. I'm not sure if you can see the bar chart very well. However, there were studies on what types of skills or what types of know-how is considered important by certain organizations. So it was split between businesses, charities, and public sector organizations, what they consider important skills in terms of their cybersecurity employees. And if you go through the list, it actually lists a couple of very non-technical skills as well. But there are there's a lot of legal knowledge that goes into cybersecurity. then obviously soft skills, in case a company is selling cybersecurity products, they do need people that are very comfortable with speaking to and convincing other people. So perhaps seeking to branch out the definition of cybersecurity a little more could help to, or I guess emphasizing that the hiring criteria for cybersecurity jobs are not merely technical could improve that. However, from what I saw as personal experience, a lot of cybersecurity jobs or cyber threat intelligence jobs up until today still heavily emphasize technical skills. Next, vetting procedures. So this kind of ties into, I guess, the entire question as to hiring foreigners. Foreigners can be incredibly skilled, and perhaps a government organization may have found someone who is perfect for that role. However, the problem is they're foreign, perhaps they're from a country that is not necessarily terribly friendly towards the UK. So they may simply not pass vetting procedures that are necessary to work for a government organization. I myself had not large issues with this kind of stuff, but I lived in a couple of countries that would have required me to provide a police conduct certificate, I believe it's called, and basically acquiring that after having lived in a number of difficult countries for a long time is very time consuming. And at the end of the day, it can even prevent people from being fully integrated into the analytical team, onto the cybersecurity team altogether. Then there was a McAfee report mentioned the so-called hacking stigma. For instance, there may be some people who have been hacking for fun in their basement. They would be making excellent penetration testers. However, because they have this kind of hacking background, a lot of companies may well simply not hire them, even though they may have excellent skills. I guess there are some good reasons for why you would not hire someone who has possibly done something illegal. However, I believe that a lot of skills simply may be lost if all of these kinds of people are excluded. Lastly, sponsorship and visas. I guess it's similar to vetting procedures, as in hiring foreigners. Foreigners from overseas require sponsorship. The visa process can be very time consuming, and a lot of companies will, I guess, simply not bother to go through the entire visa process, so they will just simply hire someone from the UK who's maybe not the ideal candidate, but just to expedite the process of hiring someone, they will choose not to conduct these visa procedures. So all of these points broadly go into recruitment and the hiring process, and how these kinds of factors can impede diversification at the moment. How can we increase diversity? Immediately starting off with the hiring process, in terms of not just hiring foreigners, I already made points about that, but for example, hiring neurodiverse people, so perhaps people who are not necessarily comfortable conducting a one-to-one interview. So think about people with autism who may well go to an interview and then spectacularly fail because people say, well, look, they're not performing too well. Or people who have perhaps taught themselves a lot of programming at home, but who do not have university credentials, could also be excluded from the cybersecurity sector. So there are some other points about the hiring process, and I guess I'm not trying to tell anyone, well, just go through with the sponsorship and just hire more foreigners, but I think it's something important to keep in mind. Then, as I've already touched upon, perhaps redefining what cybersecurity means and moving away from the merely technical term of it, and encouraging more people to apply, and emphasizing that perhaps a lot of soft skills or legal skills may be necessary as well. Coming to diversity of thought in organizational culture, encouraging more disagreement, and perhaps letting people with less experience also speak amongst themselves. So coming back to Kahneman and Tversky, who conducted studies on cognitive biases, they found that removing an authority figure or an opinion leader from an analytical group will actually let the remaining members of the group speak more freely and be more inclined to dissent. However, if an authority figure is present, they will most of the time simply go along with what they have to say. Well, you know, they're the authority after all, so how can you disagree with them? However, as I've already touched upon in terms of cognitive biases, people may be very experienced but also very wrong. So in terms of organizational culture, it's important to always encourage dissent, perhaps always emphasize the devil's advocate position or encourage people to play devil's advocate as well. And lastly, encouraging existing employees, perhaps that do not have a cybersecurity background, to perhaps try to take a certification or trying to slowly move them into cybersecurity. If you already have existing employees that perhaps show interest in cybersecurity and are willing to take on the challenge, you can try to retrain them. The benefit of that is you don't have to hire someone new. If you're happy with your employee already, you can try to retrain them instead of going through the often arduous process of hiring someone new. Coming to a few existing initiatives. So in the UK, we have the Cyber Skills Immediate Impact Fund. It is basically a fund seeking to distribute money to employers and training programs in cybersecurity, and it focuses on underrepresented groups. From what I could gather, this fund specifically focuses on gender and ethnic diversity, so seeking to get more women into cybersecurity and ethnic underrepresented groups as well. The Cyber Neurodiversity Group, however, focuses entirely on, as the title implies, neurodiversity, so they hold events and publish reports and try to encourage neurodiverse people to try to get into cybersecurity and hold events for them to network where possibly they feel more comfortable rather than being a general networking event. So if you're autistic and you feel very out of place at a regular networking event because you do not necessarily have the comfort in social situations that others do, this is what the Cyber Neurodiversity Group is trying to help with. And that's about it for me. Here are my references, and thank you for your attention.